All right, so we are going to continue our lecture and discussion over biodiversity and the idea of how do we protect, preserve species. We want to pick up where we left off the other day. The other day we left off at the point of this extinction crisis that we are in right now. And extinction's natural. It happens. Species go extinct all the time. They've gone extinct throughout the history of the Earth. But the rate is the concern for the extinction crisis we're under right now. So biologists are fully comfortable saying we are in a sixth mass extinction. And the big concern here is we have accelerated the rate of extinction between 100 to 1,000 times faster than normal. So that is what we're worried about, is how fast species are going extinct and what humans are doing to cause this extinction and this rate of extinction. So we had started talking a little bit about it. I want to make sure we go through all the causes, because if we're going to do any kind of conservation, preservation, restoration, we need to know the cause of the problem. Address the cause. If you don't, it does you no good. So for people who don't understand this, non-scientists who don't have as strong of a background about these topics as you guys, put this parallel in front of them. You go to the doctor, you're sick, you have a problem with your kidneys, yet the doctor wants to put a cast on your foot. It does nothing for your kidneys. It does nothing for resolving the problem. That's the same analogy with extinctions. What is the root cause of that species problem? Why is our population crashing? Find the root cause. Now, something to definitely be very, very aware of, it's typically not one single issue. It's not like, ooh, here's the one silver bullet that's causing this species to go extinct. It's usually a combination of factors. But can you address the most concerning of those factors? Start with that one, and then work your way through the others as well. So, all right, so here's our list. And the acronym that makes it easy to remember is the acronym HIPPO, H-I-P-P-O. But when we talk about human threats to biodiversity, number one in your favorite list here is habitat, and I'm just going to call it habitat issues. So it could be stuff like habitat destruction, habitat alteration, habitat degradation. Simply, you take the habitat away from a species, and it's hard to reproduce and maintain a viable population. That is the biggest culprit. That's responsible for about 60 to 65% of species going extinct in our lifetime right now, current species extinction. Again, not the only cause, but if you're going to pick one cause to go after that's going to have the biggest positive impact, address habitat issues. That's going to save a lot of species. But again, depending on the species, habitat may not be a problem. It might be something like an invasive species. All right, here's a non-native. Comes into the ecosystem, outcompetes the native species. Wipes out food that the native population needs because that invasive species is more adaptable, it's more successful, it's more competitive because it doesn't have any pressure against it when it's in a new invasive environment. So, and I'm going to go through some examples of these. Let's just get the list going here. So we got habitat, invasive species, pollution, let me get this out of the way. So pollution, population growth, this is humans, and then the last major cause is overharvesting. All right, so these are your main causes. We can let me do it here, and I'm going to readjust size here. We can add a whole list of others. One of the others that I would definitely encourage you to really start to pay attention to, because it's kind of connected to all of these, is climate change. Climate change is causing problems. It's massive problems. Climate change is causing habitat issues. As polar caps melt, sea ice is not there. There's a habitat loss for polar bears and Arctic animals. Climate change is causing temperatures to increase. This allows invasive species to spread easier. It allows more pollution, etc., etc., etc. So it is a part of this equation and is becoming a more serious part of the equation. Okay. All right, so let's walk through each of these kind of one at a time, look at the big issues and see what's going on. So habitat issues, deforestation. The Amazon is being cut down and burned to make space for ranchers to grow crops, to raise cattle, so then they can export beef. And I'm not against people having a livelihood, but how many thousands and thousands of species are getting pushed into extinction because of deforestation in the Amazon? We have this in our backyard in Illinois. Consider agriculture, modern commercial agriculture. How much land has been turned from prairie biome into farm ground? And that's great. That's a good source for the economy. But we've destroyed most of our native habitat in Illinois. How many forests have been cut down and turned into farm field or urban development or things of that nature? So we can't just point our finger at the Amazon and say bad. We did the same thing here in Illinois hundreds of years ago. And this is what we did to get us to this developed nation status. People who live in those developing countries who have those resources are just trying to get to where we're at. And in order to do it, they often have to alter, degrade, or destroy the habitat to make it farmable or develop it so then they can improve their economy and their livelihood. So it's a very, very challenging issue. We will circle back to this when we talk about urban development and planning and things like that. Okay, so think about some examples, look around your area, your communities, how many developments are going in, how much urban growth is occurring, a thing called urban sprawl. Every time that happens, that takes habitat away from native species. So before we criticize other countries, we need to look at ourselves first and see what we're doing. Now, invasives. Here's just a nice kind of quick overview of some invasive species in North America. These don't belong here. They didn't start here, but they got brought here, and they're a huge issue. The one that's not on here that I want you guys to definitely think about is honeysuckle. That needs to be added to this list. Honeysuckle is a huge issue. We can see it right here on campus when we go down to the pond. That little stream, there's honeysuckle all over in there. And it's choking out the native wildlife. The native vegetation doesn't have a chance to grow, doesn't have a chance to reproduce, and it's altering the forest ecosystems everywhere that we find honeysuckle. So lots of these species are found in the US and they're disrupting the ecosystems. Again, the challenge is our native species can't compete against them. Native predators don't know what the heck to do with these things. So they're scratching their heads like, we don't know what to do with that stuff. So we won't eat it, we won't control it, and their populations grow exponentially. So it creates just huge, huge problems. And frustratingly enough, sometimes the invasive is brought here intentionally. Other times it gets here accidentally or unintentionally. But the bottom line is once it's here or once it's in a new environment, it's a pain to try to get it under control, to try to get it realistically, it may never get removed because it doesn't have natural controls on its population. People can't step in and constantly control the population of some of these things and make sure they're always going to be eliminated. Doesn't work that way. There has to be natural checks and balances, and we've eliminated a lot of those. All right, so invasives, big problem. All right, let's look at the next one. Pollution. Now, pollution, there's a wide spectrum of types of pollution, examples. I mean, this is just a massive field or massive topic. We will revisit this as we get into resources later in the semester, but think about pesticide use in agriculture. Look at that chart, all right? Think about where we live, and this is 2016 data, a couple years old, but sadly, I don't see much difference with 18, 19 data or what we'll see in 20 or 21 and so on. But look at how much pesticide, glyphosate, that's a weed killer. That's it. So there's pesticides, herbicides. How much of that is used per square mile? 88 pounds. The Midwest has some of the highest pesticide, herbicide use in the country. And it's not a shock. It's because everything here is, this is what we call the agricultural belt, the corn belt, the farm belt, soybeans, wheat, corn, etc., grown here. So this is part of modern agriculture. So we're going to talk about this again in another unit and say, okay, is there a way to reduce this? Is there a way to decrease our pesticide use? Something to point out, check out California. This section right here has equivalent usage as what we have in the Midwest. That's where most of our fruit and vegetables come from if they're coming out of California. That's the growing valley in California. So when we talked about biomes, we talked about things that influence biomes and affect biome distribution. Well, you got a mountain range here that causes all the rain to hit the mountains and drop down into this area, and then the hot, dry winds come over the top, creating desert on the east side. So back to the original point though, pesticide and herbicide, actually let me just kind of revise this, chemical use in agriculture is incredibly problematic, but how do we deal with it is something, again, we'll discuss in future chapters and future topics. So, it leads to big problems. We got mercury in coal-fired power plants, we have air pollution. There's just a big laundry list there, but that is causing problems for species. Now, all right, P, the other P, population, human population growth. We are going to see 8 to 10 billion people in the next probably 20 to 30 years. 8 to 10. All right, so we got a big problem. Most of these people will be coming from developing countries, less developed countries, what do we want to term you want to apply there? But there's a massive, massive problem coming our way with increased human population because of the resource consumption that we do. And it's not like we as a developed country can point our finger at China and India and Afghanistan and Iran and Guatemala and so on and so forth and say, quit having so many kids, because look at the resources we consume. Developed countries make up, let me give you some quick stats here. Developed countries, United States, Canada, etc., we make up about 23 roughly percent of the population, but we consume about 80% of resources. Our environmental footprint is 20 times greater than that of a developing country person. That's a big number. So I want that to sink in, and then we'll talk about this a little bit more and the O for hippo in the next lecture.